So Onjali and I met 4 years ago through the charity Nissan that brings together Jewish and Muslim women to build mutual understanding and conversation. Onjali and I sat next to each other at a meeting, and honestly, within that moment, we have become friends for life. Onjali is an incredible woman. You might have heard her on Woman's Hour this morning. She's a campaigner and founder of the not-for-profit Making Her Story, working with agencies large and small. It works to mobilise people from all walks of life to support women's shelters, lobby for women's rights and join anti-trafficking movements. Onjali is also an award-winning children's author. Her debut children's book, The Boy at the Back of the Class, highlighted the refugee crisis from a child's perspective, and it won the Blue Peter Children's Book of the Year 2019 and the Waterstones Children's Book of the Year in that same year, 2019. I found out last week that it sold 250,000 copies around the world, which is incredible. Her second book, The Star Outside My Window, focuses on the tragic impacts of domestic violence on the lives of children. And her third book, The Nightbus Hero, which she finished during lockdown, is released tomorrow. So I would like to, just before I introduce Onjali, I'll tell you a bit about the Nightbus Hero and the context for it. As the eviction ban is lifted, furlough schemes end, there are fears of a new wave of homelessness in the UK and London. Over 4,000 individuals were sleeping rough as of 2019, 28% more than in 2018. I'll say that again. In London, over 4,000 individuals were sleeping rough as of 2019 and 28% more than in 2018. Something needs to change. Told from the perspective of a bully, the Nightbus Hero explores themes of bullying and homelessness while celebrating kindness, friendship, and the potential everyone has to change for the good. I have got my book here, and I would like to have a very warm welcome to Onjali.
Oh gosh, hi everyone. Jude, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And Craig, gosh, you're such a hero. Everyone that's spoken tonight is just absolutely stunning in what they're trying to do and changing the world for the better. So I'm going to ask you, what does an armchair, a large packet of frozen peas, bird's eye, and a bus map have to do with life in lockdown? In my world, an awful lot, because without them, I definitely would not have been able to write The Nightbus Hero, my third children's book, and one which, in an almost ironic twist of fate, was destined to focus on the issue of homelessness at a time in the world's history when being without a home seemed more unfathomable and unacceptable than ever before. Sitting in my armchair day after day, night after night, week after week, trying to force a story out of me was not a natural state to be in. Hearing sirens around me every half hour here in London, or hearing the phone ring incessantly with yet more sad news of family and loved ones who we had heard hadn't survived this pandemic, was not a natural state in which to be creative in. In fact, sitting and writing a children's story in the midst of so much pain and grief and deep helplessness seemed at times like an insult to the memories of my loved ones that I'd lost. But there was one thing that kept me going, and one image that made me strap those bags of frozen peas to my legs to stop them from spasming and write on. And that was the image of a man sleeping by the steps of my local police station, which has remained seared in my brain since the age of 14. Now, I first saw this man on my way to a friend's house one morning for our usual walk to school together. He had a grey, white, fluffy beard, a flat, woolly hat, an old black coat, and parked right beside him was a trolley full of neatly folded newspapers, piled so high that they looked like mini tower blocks. I remember feeling really shocked that someone who was old enough to be my granddad was having to sleep on flattened out cardboard boxes with nothing but some thin blankets and newspaper sheets to help him stay warm. The next day, on my way to school, there he was again, and sleeping right there by the police station, and the next day, and the next day after that, and the following days too, but not just at the police station. I also began to notice him wandering up and down my local high street as well. Now, me at 14, just to give you an idea, I was really shy. I was lacking in too much, I was just lacking in confidence to ask anyone if they needed any help, let alone a homeless man, even though I desperately wanted to ask him and to speak to him. I had a massive fringe, so my fringe literally practically hid half my face, and I had really big round NHS glasses to hide myself behind, so I just stare at him every morning as I passed by. And I imagine, being stared at by a slightly pudgy, very spotty Asian girl every morning was a little bit strange for the old man, and perhaps a little bit funny too, because after a week or two of seeing me, he began to grin and give me a small wave as well. And that was all it took, really. It was all it took for me to decide to do something. Almost immediately after that first wave, instead of just staring at him like an owl and hurrying past every morning, I began to stop and leave him something. Usually it was just a piece of fruit or a slightly squashed box of biscuits. But on the days when I had a bit of pocket money and I felt a bit richer, it was a portion of fish and chips or a hot breakfast meal from McDonald's, which was literally a few hundred yards away. But even through those moments of gifting, I was still too shy. I just couldn't speak to him. I was too scared to speak to someone who was still a stranger to me. So I'd silently just kind of run up to him, hand out whatever I had, and then run off again, kind of like a little bit of a criminal. Now, this went on for a good few years, and I got to know the old man's patterns and his likes and dislikes. So spring and summer, he was often by the police station in his makeshift bed, which he would pack away really neatly when he went off to hunt for food and newspapers from the local bins. He loved fried chicken and chips. He loved fish and chips. And he also really liked McDonald's hot chocolate with a side of apple pie. He hated coffee, really hated it, and he hated filet of fish. I think because of the tartar sauce. Now, come October, so round about this time of the year, he would just disappear. And I often hoped that it was because he'd found a shelter that was looking after him and feeding him and keeping him warm. And then come the warmer spring days, there he'd be again, right by the police station. Now, as I said, time passed and I moved on from secondary school to college. And luckily my bus stop for college was right next to the police station. So our kind of silent friendship continued for a couple of years as well after I started college. I began to drop off fruit every morning. And then on the way home from college, I would drop off something hot for him to have as well. But then one morning around Easter, I began to notice that the old man wasn't really there anymore, and his trolley was gone and his makeshift bed was gone as well. And he was still missing the next day and the next day after that. And I began to feel really in my gut that something was wrong. So I mustered up the courage finally to go into the police station and ask if anyone had seen the old man that slept by the staircase. The answer I received, as short as it was one of the first things I heard that really shook me to my core. I was told by the police officer that I was speaking to that the old man had died a few nights ago. And when I asked him if anyone knew anything about him, the officer simply shrugged and said, not really, but everyone called him Thomas. So everyone called him Thomas. Who knows if that was even his real name, but that's what he became to me. He became Thomas. To say I felt really devastated would be just a beginning. Thomas had really become to be a large part of my world. I loved seeing him nearly every day, and the silent grins and thumbs up and waves he would give me whenever he saw me were really something that I looked forward to. And not only was he suddenly gone, but I had never even had the courage to ask him his name or to ask him what his story was, how he'd ended up sleeping on the streets, or even ask him one of the single questions, the single one of the 10,000 questions I had had in my head over the years. Now, just before he died, my mum had actually come to know of Thomas. She'd seen me giving him food. So what she'd begun to do was to give me a few extra pounds a week to try and help him out in some way, or give me an extra packet of crisps or some fruit in my bag to leave with him. So I actually had no excuse not to speak to him. I had no excuse not to actually kind of try and get to know him. So I wasn't just devastated at Thomas's passing. I was really angry at myself as well for being too shy and too scared to find out his story and maybe help him a little bit too. The summer of Thomas's passing was the summer that kind of changed my life, because that was the summer that I started to work at my mum's welfare advice charity and housing charity. It's now called the Limehouse Project, and it is in Tower Hamlets. It helps thousands of people a year keep their homes, stops them from becoming homeless, and access the help that they need to stay safe. And that was also a summer that I made a promise for myself. That promise was that I would try and speak more, that I would run away less, and I would always try and recognize people who are in need of help and have the courage to speak with them. It doesn't always work. Some days my courage really fails me and my tongue runs for the Bahamas. In more than one crucial occasion, I get too shy again. But it's really because of Thomas that I began to find my way and place in the world. Knowing him led me to beginning all the works that has led me to write the books. And the memory of him is what really helped me get through lockdown and produce a story in the midst of it, as crazy as that seems sometimes. So here it is, the Nightbus Hero, featuring a homeless man called Thomas, written in the memory of a man called Thomas, and it's kind of forged in hope, the hopes that it will help little ones, teachers, parents, grandparents start discussions around how we might be able to help all the Thomases of our world. Not just through this pandemic 2.0 that's about to come our way, but also afterwards and for all time, so that they can have a place to shield in and be safe in for the rest of their lives. Now, just to end, I'm going to read a very short paragraph, and just to give you a kind of background as to what's happened. Hector, who's the kind of anti-hero of the story, he's a bit of a bully. He's had a very bad day. He's had an embarrassing day. He's with his two best friends who are making fun of him, and he suddenly has an idea when he sees the homeless man called Thomas standing before him. We reached the top of the hill where an old bench stood beneath the oak trees. And that's when I spotted him, the old man. I'd seen him there before, lots of times, sitting on the bench next to a trolley piled high with rubbish. He was in his usual long, old, crumply black coat that looked as if it had been pulled out from a bin, and was wearing the bright yellow woolly hat he always had on his head, even in summer. And without even trying, I had the most genius idea that had ever been born. In fact, it was so genius and so out of the box and so unexpected that I knew it'd be enough to make Will and Katie shut up once and for all. I stopped walking, which made Will and Katie automatically stop too. "Want to have some fun?" I asked. Will nodded, a smile breaking out across his face. "See that old man there?" I asked, pointing towards the bench. "You mean the old trolley man?" asked Katie. "Yeah, we're going to let him know he's not allowed here anymore." "How?" whispered Katie, leaning in towards me. I waited for a few seconds to keep them guessing, and then whispered back, "I'm going to take his hat." Now, I know that lots of you here tonight will know homeless communities or know of homeless communities. You might have a Thomas in your life who you might smile and wave to. It might be a big issue seller. It might be someone who's sleeping rough in your area. It might be someone who's going to a women's refuge and trying to find some safety there. Whether they're invisible or visible, we can all do something to help our homeless. And please remember that nothing you do is ever too small. So whether it's, putting an extra pot of cereal in your local supermarket food bank, or contacting your MP to find out what they're going to do to make sure our homeless aren't turfed back out on the streets, or talking to someone about a brilliant charity or a person you've just met, all of it makes a difference and creates endless ripple effects that you might not ever really see the end of. Now, COVID-19 showed us that every single borough, no matter how rich or poor or big or small, had the space to shelter every single one of our rough sleepers, all 4,000 of them. And when push comes to shove, that we can also do it in a weekend. If we can do it in a weekend, then surely we should be able to do it for all time. But to make that happen, I know that every single one of us, no matter our status or income or whatever it is that we might or might not have, needs to speak up. We need to give that smile to someone who might be sleeping rough. We need to make sure that we're speaking about our homeless to each other, and make sure that actually the powers that be know that we're not going to accept our homeless being turfed out again. So that's me. Thank you so much for listening to me, and yeah, for hearing me read a little bit of the Nightbus Hero as well.